Under the bruised sky, where thunder rolled like an angry drum and lightning tore the heavens open in jagged white scars, a lone figure moved across the drenched earth. Cassidy Flynn was nothing more than a poor rancher with calloused hands and weathered boots, yet that night the storm conspired to lead him to a discovery that would unravel the quiet threads of his existence. The rain whipped against his skin, soaking through his coat until he felt the chill deep in his bones. But it was not the cold that made his heart jolt. It was the sound that carried through the storm, a cry, sharp and desperate, slicing the air like a blade. His pulse quickened, his steps drawn by instinct rather than reason, for something in that cry did not belong to the storm. It belonged to life, fragile yet fierce, clinging to survival in the wilderness. The canyon's edge loomed, jagged rocks glistening beneath sheets of water, and in that chaos of mud and lightning he saw them. Two figures half buried under fallen stone, their long hair plastered to their faces, their powerful limbs pinned by nature's fury. He should have turned away. Any man in his position would have ridden for safety, would have whispered a prayer and left fate to decide. But Cassidy's feet betrayed him. His heart betrayed him. He moved closer, mud sucking at his boots, hands reaching for branches, muscles straining against stone. The taller of the two met his eyes even as she lay trapped, and there was no fear in that gaze, only calculation, only a silent question. Was he enemy or salvation? That stare shook him more than the thunder overhead. Every breath burned his chest as he lifted stone after stone, his back screaming with effort. The storm became a blur, the rain, the lightning, the roar of water all fading into the singular rhythm of survival. When he finally dragged the unconscious sister free, her blood mixing with rainwater in crimson rivulets, he staggered beneath her weight, but refused to let her fall. The other, limping and fierce even in pain, followed beside him. They were taller than any women he had ever seen, their presence striking even beneath the bruises and dirt, their strength undeniable, their silence louder than the storm itself. He did not yet know their names, did not yet know that his act of defiance against nature would set him against powers greater than the storm, but some part of his soul already trembled with the knowing his life would never be the same. 2 miles of rain-drenched wilderness stretched between the canyon and his cabin. Every step was agony, but he pressed on, the unconscious weight in his arms forcing his lungs to burn, his vision to blur. Beside him, the conscious sister limped with iron determination, glancing back as though shadows pursued them. When at last the cabin door closed behind them, shutting out the storm's fury, the silence inside was thick, charged, alive. Cassidy tore strips from his shirt to bind wounds, his fingers trembling not from exhaustion alone, but from the strange electricity sparking in the air. The women's dark eyes followed him, sharp and unblinking, as if measuring the shape of his soul. When his hand brushed her skin, the one called Nia did not flinch. Instead, something passed between them, unspoken, dangerous, unforgettable. He should have felt only pity, only duty, but there was something else rising within him, something unnamed, dangerous, a warmth that glowed even in the cold shadows of the storm. He did not yet know they were daughters of a chief who would gladly spill blood to protect them. He did not yet know that by saving them he had tied himself to a destiny no man could untangle. He only knew that the storm had carried more than rain that night. It had carried fate, pressing him into a story greater than his weary, ordinary life. And somewhere in the stillness of that cabin, as whispers curled in a language he did not understand, as the firelight painted their faces in gold and shadow, he realized that this was not the end of the storm, but only the beginning. What he had saved was not merely two strangers. What he had carried into his home was the promise of a love that could heal and destroy, a love that would test the boundaries of blood and culture, of fear and longing. If you feel the weight of destiny in these words, if the storm's echo stirs something in your heart, let your presence be known. Like, comment, and subscribe, so this story may continue to reach others who crave warmth, healing, and the kind of love that bends the rules of the world. Your support, as gentle as a hand in the darkness, helps keep these tales alive. And as we move forward, deeper into the firelight of what follows, remember, sometimes the most ordinary men are chosen for extraordinary loves. The firelight flickered against rough-hewn walls, throwing shadows that stretched and curled like restless spirits, and in that fragile glow, Cassidy felt the weight of something he could not yet name. The storm still whispered outside, the rain softening to a mournful rhythm upon the roof, but within his cabin the air had shifted into something intimate, charged, alive. He had bound their wounds with trembling hands, his shirt torn into strips, his fingers stained with their blood and the mud of the canyon, and in return he found himself bound by their gaze. Two pairs of dark eyes, each different in depth and tone, but both striking him with the same intensity, as if they had been waiting for him long before the storm had drawn their lives together. The conscious one, Naya, sat upright against the wall, her breath steady, but her legs still aching beneath the bandages. When Cassidy's eyes lingered on her too long, she returned his gaze with a composure that unsettled him, a quiet defiance that carried the weight of a warrior who had seen both cruelty and sacrifice. Yet, beneath that strength, he caught glimpses of something unexpected, a flicker of curiosity, a fragile spark of trust. He had not taken advantage of her vulnerability. He had not demanded anything in return. He had simply done what he believed was right. And in her world, where men were often measured by power and possession, this small act of tenderness was more radical than any blade drawn in battle. Beside the fire, her sister stirred. Kira's eyes opened slowly, heavy with pain and fatigue, yet when her gaze landed on Cassidy, it was sharp enough to pierce him. Even in her weakness, she radiated presence, a gravity that drew the room around her. She whispered something in Apache, her voice low, musical, as though she spoke a secret meant only for her sister's ears. The two women exchanged words in their native tongue, their voices weaving together like the threads of a song. Cassidy understood none of it, but he felt it nonetheless, as if the air itself translated the rhythm of their intent. They spoke of him, he knew it, for their glances fell upon him in pauses too deliberate to be chance. When Kira finally attempted to rise, Cassidy was at her side before thought could intervene. His hand found her shoulder, steadying her, and in that simple touch he felt her strength ripple beneath his palm. She looked at him then, not with gratitude alone, but with the same unreadable intensity her sister had shown. "You could have left us," she said at last, her voice edged with disbelief and wonder. Cassidy shook his head, his own words rough and quiet. "I don't leave people to suffer." It was the truth, stripped bare, and yet even as he spoke it, he realized the weight those words carried. He had not seen them as strangers of another blood, another tribe, another world. He had seen them simply as human. That recognition, so ordinary to him, was extraordinary to them. The hours crawled forward, heavy with silence, yet filled with an energy that made Cassidy restless. The storm outside softened, but within the cabin a different storm gathered. He caught the way Nia studied his hands as he stoked the fire, the way Kira's eyes followed him when she thought he wasn't looking. They moved with the grace of predators even in their weakness, their bodies strong, sculpted by years of survival. And yet there was something vulnerable beneath the surface, something raw, something aching to be acknowledged. Cassidy felt it stir within him too, not merely desire, though desire pulsed strong enough to unsettle his every thought, but a longing deeper, older, as though his soul recognized something it had been missing all along. The cabin became too small for the weight of such silence. Each creak of the wood, each rustle of blankets, each whispered phrase in Apache magnified the space between them until Cassidy's chest ached with the pressure of it. At one moment he thought he heard footsteps near his door, soft and hesitant, but they retreated before he could rise. Sleep toyed with him, but never came fully, leaving him caught between dream and waking. In that liminal space he imagined hands brushing against his skin, voices murmuring in the dark, eyes filled with promises he could not yet understand. When dawn broke, pale and hesitant, he awoke to find them standing together at the foot of his bed. Their silhouettes were framed in the fragile morning light, their faces unreadable, but their presence undeniable. His heart jolted at the sight of them, not from fear, but from the realization that whatever path lay ahead, he was already entwined in it. The storm had passed, but something far more dangerous had begun. They did not move, did not speak at first, and yet Cassidy felt the truth pressing against him like the weight of the rising sun. He was no longer merely their rescuer. He had become something else to them, something neither he nor they yet dared to name. And in that stillness, where the remnants of night lingered like fading embers, Cassidy understood that fate was no longer a distant word told in campfire stories. It had stepped into his home, stood before his bed, and looked him in the eyes. He had taken them from the storm, but they were about to lead him into another tempest entirely, one of desire and danger, healing and ruin, a love that would break every rule he had ever known. The moment breathed like a living thing, charged and fragile, and though words had yet to be spoken, Cassidy felt their weight pressing closer, promising that this was only the beginning of a story neither of them could escape. And so, as light crept slowly across the wooden floor, his heart prepared for the next step, one that would bind him to them in ways deeper than he could yet imagine. The morning stretched heavy with silence, though it was not the silence of peace, but of words held back, of truths hovering in the air, waiting to fall like sparks onto dry wood. Cassidy moved about the cabin with careful hands, stoking the fire, pouring water into tin cups, anything to steady the trembling in his chest. Yet each time he looked up, he found them watching him. Two pairs of eyes, dark and unblinking, filled with something more than gratitude, something too deep and unsettling to ignore. Nia's gaze was steady, her expression a mask of composure that only sharpened her beauty, while Kira's eyes held a fiercer light, an intensity that seemed to strip the air of breath. They spoke softly to each other in Apache, their words flowing like a secret river beneath the surface of the room. Cassidy caught none of it, yet he felt everything, the weight of their glances, the way their voices softened and tightened, the way silence fell between them like a decision being shaped. He knew instinctively that he was the subject of their whispers, and though his heart pounded with unease, another part of him thrilled to it, drawn into their secret world even as he stood outside of it. When Kira finally turned to him, her voice was low, threaded with something that sent shivers across his skin. "You could have walked away." Cassidy paused, meeting her gaze. "But I didn't." Naya's lips curved, not quite a smile, but something gentler than the hard edges she had shown him before. "You see us as people," she murmured, as though the words themselves were fragile. Cassidy frowned softly. "Of course. What else would I see?" Their silence in response was louder than thunder. He realized then that perhaps not everyone had given them that simple recognition, that in a world defined by blood and war, humanity itself had been stolen from them too often, that his refusal to see them as enemy or prize had struck deeper than he imagined. As the day passed, a fragile rhythm formed. He offered them food from his modest pantry, and they accepted, though the act of sharing a meal seemed to carry an intimacy far beyond the meager bread and beans he placed before them. Their every movement echoed each other's, fluid and synchronized, like a dance performed countless times. Cassidy found himself unable to look away, caught between awe and a longing that burned slow and steady, as if the storm outside had settled into his veins instead. Night returned with a hush, the sky outside cleansed but restless, stars scattered like shards of glass across a dark canvas. The fire in the cabin dimmed, shadows reaching into corners, and once again the women settled by the hearth, side by side, their silhouettes moving in quiet unison. Cassidy lay on his narrow bed, the blanket rough beneath his fingers, but sleep would not come. He listened instead to the soft rustle of their blankets, the low cadence of whispers in a language he could not grasp. Each word was a thread, and together they wove a tapestry of mystery that wrapped itself around him. The hours bled into one another until exhaustion pulled him under. But even in dreams, he was not free. He dreamed of eyes glowing like embers, of hands brushing his skin with reverence, of voices whispering secrets that filled his chest with both fire and fear. And when he awoke, it was to the sight of them standing once more at his bedside, their dark hair braided differently now, their expressions solemn yet luminous in the fragile light of dawn. Something had shifted. He felt it as surely as he felt the air in his lungs. They stood on either side of him, as though they were not two but one force, and the space between them was charged with a truth too heavy to remain unspoken much longer. Cassidy's breath caught in his throat, his heart hammering with the certainty that the storm had not left them. It had only moved inside these walls, and he was its center. He sat up slowly, caught between them, the air thick with unspoken confession. Naya's voice was the first to break the silence, soft as a prayer, yet sharp enough to pierce through his chest. "We have decided something." Kira's gaze locked with his, and her words fell like a stone into still water. "We both want the same thing." Cassidy swallowed hard, his mind reeling, for though the words were simple, the meaning was vast. Their eyes did not waver, their bodies leaned closer, and in that moment the world itself seemed to hold its breath. What began in the storm had carried him here, to this fragile, firelit room, where destiny pressed close, where two hearts beat in unison and chose him, where love itself was about to break every boundary he had ever known. The night no longer belonged to silence. It belonged to revelation, and it would change everything. The confession lingered in the air long after their voices had faded, like smoke curling from a dying fire, heavy with meaning, yet fragile enough to vanish if touched too quickly. Cassidy's heart pounded in his chest, not with fear of the storm outside or the weight of stones he had lifted hours before, but with something far more dangerous. Desire braided with awe, longing laced with terror. He sat caught between them. The poor rancher who had entered the storm a simple man, now standing on the threshold of a destiny too vast to grasp. The firelight played across their faces, softening the sharp angles of warriors into something tender, almost luminous. Nia leaned closer, her breath carrying the warmth of cedar smoke and something sweeter, something that steadied him even as it set his veins aflame. Kira flanked the other side, her presence fierce yet strangely healing, as if she had been forged not only to fight, but also to mend what the world had broken. Their words had revealed what he scarcely dared believe, that they did not merely accept his kindness, they desired him, both of them, as though fate itself had chosen to weave their lives together. But even in that charged moment, reality clawed back into the cabin. Hoofbeats, distant at first, then growing louder, rhythmic, purposeful. The sound made the sisters tense instantly, their bodies straightening with the instinct of predators ready for battle. Nia moved to the window, her injured leg forgotten, while Kira drifted toward the door, her hand hovering where a weapon should have been. Cassidy felt his breath catch. 4 riders crested the rise, their silhouettes etched against the pale light of morning, their approach cutting through the fragile cocoon of intimacy that had wrapped around them. "They search for us," Nia whispered, eyes narrowing as she studied the warriors spreading across the land like hunters closing on prey. "If they find us here—" Her words trailed off, but Cassidy understood. He was a white rancher. They were the daughters of a war chief. To be discovered together beneath one roof would not be forgiven, no matter his intentions. Fear surged through him, not for his life alone, but for the fragile bond that had just begun to bloom in the space between them. The hoofbeats grew nearer, the voices of the approaching men calling out in Apache, demanding answers from the storm-scoured earth. Cassidy's pulse raced as he looked to the sisters, searching for guidance. But their eyes were steady, their movements measured, as though they had long prepared for such trials. "We will tell them the truth," Kira said firmly, "that you offered shelter as honor requires. If they doubt, they will remember whose daughters we are." Her voice was like a blade, sharp, decisive, but there was also a strange comfort in it, as though she carried enough strength for them all. Cassidy's hands shook as the pounding on the cabin door began. The sisters positioned themselves deliberately, their bodies arranged with a casualness that belied strategy. To any outsider, it would appear as though they had simply taken refuge beside his fire. But Cassidy knew the truth. In their eyes, in their whispered words, in the heat that had bound them together, something irreversible had already begun. He felt the storm return, not in rain and thunder, but in the pounding of his own heart, in the thrum of possibility that terrified and healed him all at once. When the door burst open, the world shifted. Painted warriors filled the threshold, their eyes blazing with suspicion and relief all at once. Their leader's gaze fell upon the sisters first, alive, unharmed, radiant even in exhaustion, and then to Cassidy, standing between them, guilty as sin, yet unwilling to step aside. Silence crackled in the cabin like a live wire. Nia's voice broke it first, calm yet commanding, carrying the weight of her bloodline. The storm trapped us. This man gave us shelter. Her words settled heavy in the room, a truth that was both salvation and provocation. Cassidy felt every eye upon him, his torn shirt, his ragged breath, the fire in his chest. He had saved them, yes, but he had also been chosen by them, and that choice shimmered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. As the warriors tightened their grip on weapons, the sisters stood taller, closer, their presence flanking him like guardians, like lovers, like destiny itself. And in that charged instant, Cassidy knew that whatever judgment came next, vengeance, mercy, or exile, it would no longer belong to him alone. He was no longer a man apart, but bound to them, drawn into a story that would test every part of his soul. The storm had passed, but a new one had broken open, vast and unstoppable, and he had no choice but to walk into its heart. The air inside the cabin thickened with the weight of 100 unspoken truths, the storm outside replaced by another, human, dangerous, inevitable. The painted warriors fanned across the doorway, their eyes sharp, their hands tense upon weapons that glinted in the firelight. Yet it was not Cassidy they looked at first, but Nia and Kira, standing tall despite their injuries, their bodies flanking him with quiet defiance. Relief flickered across the warriors' faces, for they had found their chief's daughters alive, but suspicion quickly followed, a shadow cast upon the rancher, caught between them. Takakota, scarred and unreadable, stepped forward. His gaze swept over Cassidy's torn shirt, the makeshift bandages stained with their blood, the exhaustion etched into his frame. Then his eyes sharpened, catching the way Nia's hand lingered near Cassidy's arm, the subtle possessiveness in Kira's stance. Warriors knew how to read silences, how to sense what words concealed, and in that instant he saw what had begun to take root between them. His voice was low, steady, but edged with steel. "The chief will hear of this." Cassidy's chest tightened. The chief. The man whose bloodline he had unknowingly crossed, whose wrath was legend across the land. Yet before panic could consume him, Nia's voice rose, clear and calm, her tone carrying the weight of her heritage. "This man gave us shelter, as the treaty demands. He asked for nothing, took nothing, gave only kindness." Her words, like a healing balm, softened the tension for a moment, yet suspicion still lingered. Kira stepped forward, her dark eyes unwavering. "We live because of him. Without his strength, we would lie beneath the stones of the canyon." She gestured toward Cassidy, her voice steady, but in the curve of her tone there was something else, something warmer, something that belonged not to warriors, but to women who had chosen. The flicker of it did not go unnoticed. Takakota studied them all in silence, then nodded once, a sharp gesture that carried both decision and warning. "You will return to the chief, all three of you." The words struck Cassidy like a blow. His blood ran cold, yet Nia's hand brushed lightly against his as if she sensed the storm raging inside him. That touch, fleeting and gentle, steadied him more than any weapon ever could. Her voice dropped so low only he could hear. "Whatever comes, remember, we chose you." The journey to the Apache settlement was a blur of hoofbeats and glances heavy with meaning. Cassidy rode surrounded by warriors, their suspicion a constant weight pressing down on him. Yet the sisters remained close, riding beside him, their presence both shield and promise. Whenever fear clawed at his throat, he caught their eyes, Nia's steady, Kira's burning, and found in them something stronger than fear. Faith. They believed in him, and that belief was a healing fire, burning away the shadows that threatened to consume him. When the settlement appeared, hidden deep within the canyon, Cassidy felt his breath falter. Dozens of eyes turned toward them as they entered, children pausing in their play, women looking up from their fires, warriors tightening hands around weapons. At the center, tall and commanding, stood War Chief Ayana. His gaze first found his daughters, and in that flicker of relief, Cassidy saw the man beneath the title. But when those eyes shifted to him, the warmth vanished, replaced by a cold scrutiny that pierced to the bone. The chief circled Cassidy slowly, like a predator measuring prey. "My daughters tell me you sheltered them." His English was precise, controlled, the words striking cleanly. Cassidy forced his voice steady. "I found them injured. I helped. Anyone would have." Ayana's eyes narrowed. "Anyone? Many would not." He studied Cassidy a long moment, then glanced at his daughters. Their posture gave him pause, for both stood close, too close, their alignment not accidental but deliberate. They flanked him like guardians, like claimants. And in their silent stance, Ayana read what the others had already begun to suspect. "Speak plainly," the chief commanded. And it was Kira who stepped forward, her chin lifted, her voice unwavering. "We both choose him." The words fell into the canyon air like thunder. Shock rippled through the gathered tribe, gasps breaking the silence. Elders whispered, warriors stiffened, and Cassidy felt his world tilt beneath him. Yet Nia's hand brushed his again, grounding him, her touch warm, her eyes filled with defiance and tenderness. Ayana's gaze darkened. "You both choose the same man." His voice carried neither disbelief nor rage, only the weight of ancient memory. And when Nia spoke again, her voice was softer, almost healing in its quiet conviction. "As our great-grandmother once chose with her sister, when survival demanded strength be shared." Cassidy's chest ached at her words. He saw then what this meant, not merely passion, not rebellion, but a tradition buried deep, a bond that defied time. The sisters had not spoken from impulse, but from vision, from destiny. They had chosen him, and in doing so, they had bound him to something larger than himself. The chief's eyes returned to Cassidy, sharp and unyielding. "Do you understand what they offer you? To accept them is to leave your world behind, to become Apache. To take their lives, their people, their destiny into your own." Cassidy's breath came ragged, yet when he looked at Nia and Kira, their eyes holding his with a faith so steady, so fierce, something within him settled. He had stumbled into this path by chance, but now chance had become choice. His heart, trembling and untested, found its answer not in reason, but in love. "I understand," he said softly, his voice carrying across the hush of the gathered tribe. "And I accept." The canyon seemed to hold its breath. the chief's expression unreadable. Yet the sisters moved closer, flanking him as they always did, their presence warm, healing, unshakable. Whatever trials lay ahead, whatever storms remained, Cassidy knew this truth. He was no longer alone. He had been chosen, and that choice was stronger than fear, stronger than fate itself. The decision spoken beneath the gaze of the chief did not end the story. It only opened its next chapter, one written not in whispers but in trials. Ayana's face, carved in the hard lines of authority, revealed little, yet the faintest shift around his eyes betrayed thought, calculation, perhaps even the ghost of respect. His voice carried steady as a river cutting through stone. "If you would be Apache, if you would be worthy of my daughter's choice, then you must prove yourself." 3 words hung heavy in the air, heavier than any threat. "You will face the trials." Cassidy's stomach tightened. The word trials echoed with danger, yet beside him, Nia and Kira stood like twin pillars, their shoulders squared, their dark eyes alive with unshaken faith. Their presence steadied him more than any weapon could. In that moment, he realized something. Their belief in him was a kind of healing, a fire that warmed even as it demanded more from him than he had ever given. He had survived storms before, storms of rain and storms of loss, but never one like this, where the test was not only survival, but becoming worthy of love that defied every law of blood and tribe. Ayana laid out the path with the calm certainty of tradition. Strength, wisdom, courage, 3 trials, each a measure not only of a man's skill, but of his heart. Cassidy listened, his breath shallow, yet when he looked to the sisters, he found his fear tempered by their gaze. Kira's eyes burned with pride, fierce and unyielding, as though daring the world to doubt him. Nia's gaze was softer, carrying the warmth of quiet conviction, her hand brushing his as if to remind him that even in solitude he would never truly be alone. Between them he felt balanced, fire and calm, storm and healing, 2 halves of a love that demanded he rise beyond himself. The first trial came with the dawn. Armed with a bow unfamiliar to his hands, Cassidy was sent into the wilderness to hunt. The land was vast, unforgiving, yet he moved with patience, learned from years of tending cattle, from watching the quiet language of animals and storms. His muscles burned, his breath caught, but he pressed forward, guided not only by survival, but by the memory of 2 women watching, waiting, believing. When at last he loosed an arrow and brought down a stag, it was not triumph alone he felt, but a surge of healing through his spirit, as though the earth itself had accepted him just enough to let him belong. The second trial tested not his hands, but his mind. Seated among elders, he listened to a dispute between families, their voices sharp with old resentment. Cassidy knew little of their customs, yet he knew fairness. He knew the language of compromise born from hard ranch life, from neighbors quarreling over fences and water. He spoke carefully, not as one above them, but as one who had struggled, bled, and mended wounds of his own. When the solution he offered left both families nodding, the elders exchanged glances, their silence carrying the weight of approval. Wisdom was not in knowing all things, it was in listening, in healing what was broken. The final trial was the hardest. Ayana led him to a narrow cliffside, the wind sharp, the stone treacherous beneath his boots. Below lay a sacred cave, where the feather of a white eagle rested, left untouched for generations. "Bring it to me," the chief commanded, his voice carrying no malice, only the authority of tradition. Cassidy's throat tightened. One wrong step meant death. Yet as he lowered himself over the edge, fingers scraping rock, he thought not of falling, but of the two pairs of eyes that had chosen him. Fear was real, but so was love. And love, he discovered, could be a rope stronger than stone. The descent tore at his muscles, tested his every nerve, but when he reached the cave and lifted the feather, light spilled across the stone, as though the ancestors themselves acknowledged his presence. The climb back was agony, but each pull upward carried with it a truth. He was no longer the man who had stumbled into the storm. He was becoming something more. When he placed the feather in Ayana's hand, silence fell across the tribe, the canyon holding its breath. Then the chief nodded once, slow and deliberate. "You have proven yourself worthy." That night the fire blazed higher than ever before. The people gathered, their voices weaving chants that rose into the starlit sky. Cassidy stood between Naya and Kira, the warmth of their hands brushing his, their shoulders touching his, their eyes shining with triumph and tenderness. Ayana's voice carried through the canyon as he spoke the words of binding, words older than memory, words that joined not only man to women, but man to tribe, stranger to home, solitude to belonging. When Ayana's voice shifted to English, it was as though prophecy itself spoke through him. What was divided is now one. What was fear becomes love. What was stranger becomes kin. Cassidy felt the truth of it burn in his chest, not as burden, but as blessing. The crowd erupted in voices, but all he could hear was the steady rhythm of the women beside him, the healing warmth of their presence. Later, when the fire's glow softened and the people drifted to their rest, Cassidy found himself within the sisters' dwelling. Soft hides lay upon the ground, shadows flickered across the walls, and for the first time there were no whispers left unspoken, no doubts left lingering. They had chosen him, and now he chose them, not with words, but with every breath, every touch, every quiet promise written into the night. Between them he felt whole, not divided, but doubled, not torn, but healed. And as dawn broke once more, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Cassidy realized he had crossed a threshold no storm could wash away. The poor rancher who had once walked alone now stood bound to love that transcended rules, to a family born not of chance but of destiny. In the sisters' eyes he saw not only passion but peace, not only fire but healing. He was no longer merely surviving, he was alive, transformed, truly home. The night of the binding ceremony lingered in Cassidy's memory like a dream too vivid to fade, every detail etched into his heart. The firelight had painted the canyon walls in hues of amber and gold. The chants of the tribe had risen like wind through the trees, and beside him Nia and Kira had stood as pillars of devotion, their presence anchoring him in a world that no longer felt foreign but fated. When Ayana declared before all that what was once divided was now united, Cassidy felt the weight of solitude dissolve from his chest, replaced by something larger, healing and whole. That night, when the tribe dispersed and silence folded back over the settlement, the sisters led him to their dwelling. There was no need for words. Their eyes spoke, Their hands reached, and Cassidy, trembling with awe, stepped into a place where desire and tenderness existed without boundaries. The hides beneath them were soft, the fire dim, but their love was fierce and unashamed. Nia's touch was steady, soothing like a balm across the wounds of his past, while Kira's was fire, awakening a hunger he had never known. Together they wove around him like a single rhythm, each complementing the other, each healing parts of him he hadn't realized were broken. For the first time, Cassidy understood what it meant to be fully seen, fully chosen, not by one heart, but by two who shared one soul. Dawn broke with a gentleness that seemed to bless their union. Cassidy woke, nestled between them, the warmth of their bodies warding off the cool morning air, their breaths steady and even. For a moment he simply lay still, letting the healing quiet of the moment sink into him, the truth of his transformation settling in his bones. He was no longer the poor rancher clinging to survival on dry land and failing fences. He had become part of something greater, a man bound to love that defied rules, a man tied to destiny that would outlast storms. The trials had proven his worth to the tribe, but here, in the quiet rhythm of shared breaths, he felt the greater victory, that he had earned their trust, their affection, their future. Kira stirred first, her eyes opening with that same fierce intensity, but when she looked at him, her expression softened into warmth he had never imagined possible. "You are ours now," her voice seemed to whisper without words, a vow as natural as breathing. Nia's hand slid into his, her touch gentle, carrying healing calm, and Cassidy felt his chest swell with gratitude so fierce it ached. Life in the days that followed was not without weight. The tribe watched, curious and cautious, measuring his every step, but each glance from the sisters anchored him. He joined in their work, learned the rhythms of their people, and found himself discovering not only survival but belonging. Children trailed him with laughter, fascinated by the white rancher who had become kin, and elders studied him with thoughtful eyes, as though seeking echoes of prophecy in his actions. Through it all, Nia and Kira walked beside him, their presence a shield, their affection a light. One evening, as the sky burned crimson with sunset, Cassidy sat with them by the river's edge. The water ran smooth, catching the colors of the sky, and for a while none of them spoke. Instead, they listened. The murmur of water, the whisper of wind through cottonwoods, the heartbeat of the earth itself. Cassidy felt the stillness soak into him, a healing silence that replaced every ache of his former life. He turned to the sisters, their faces radiant in the fading light, and realized that his heart no longer belonged to the world he had left behind. It beat here, with them, in this land, in this love, and yet he knew trials would not end with ceremony. Love that defied boundaries would always carry weight, always demand courage. There would be eyes that doubted, voices that questioned, dangers yet unseen. But when he looked at Nia's calm strength, Kira's fierce devotion, and felt the warmth of their hands enclosing his, he knew he had the strength to endure it, because love, true love, multiplies courage. It heals the wounds fear leaves behind, and it carries a man into battles he would never have braved alone. As night settled over the canyon and stars scattered like silver dust across the heavens, Cassidy lay between them once more, their presence his anchor, their love his guide. The poor rancher, who had once feared losing everything, now realized he had gained a world richer than any dream. He closed his eyes, and in the rhythm of their breathing he heard the promise of tomorrow, a promise written not in fear, but in love that would carry them all forward, no matter the storms yet to come. Years later, when the fire burned low and the children of the tribe leaned close to hear stories of how their parents' love began, Cassidy would sit between Nia and Kira, his weathered hands folded with quiet reverence, and tell them of a night when lightning split the heavens and rain turned the earth to rivers. He would tell them how a poor rancher, alone and forgotten, stumbled upon two women trapped beneath stone and storm, and how that single act of reaching out, of lifting weight not his own, changed the course of his life forever. The children would listen wide-eyed as their mothers smiled knowingly, their gazes meeting in the shared memory of whispers, of choices that defied fear, of a love that had rewritten the rules of their people. Cassidy's voice would soften when he spoke of that cabin, of the firelight flickering on faces bruised and fierce, of the way their eyes had held him still, binding him more tightly than any rope. He would tell them how love had not arrived gently, but like a storm, wild, terrifying, impossible to ignore, and how he had been remade by it, not into someone else, but into someone truer than he had ever been. Nia's hand would find his as he spoke, grounding him in her steady warmth, while Kira's gaze, still burning with that same fire, would remind him that some storms never end. They only transform into rivers that carve new valleys, new homes, new lives. The years that followed had not been free of struggle. There were voices that doubted, eyes that watched, storms that rose again to test them. Yet every challenge had been met together. Cassidy had proven not only to the tribe but to himself that worthiness was not in strength alone, nor in wisdom, nor even in courage. It was in the choice to love without fear, to hold fast when the world tried to divide, to heal what was broken with hands and heart. In their love he found healing for his own loneliness. In his devotion, the sisters found freedom to live boldly, beyond tradition, yet rooted in it. Together, they had made something the world had never seen before. A family built not on rules, but on love's boundless reach. At night, lying between them beneath the endless sprawl of stars, Cassidy often marveled at the strange road that had led him here. A storm, a canyon, two strangers with eyes like fire. And now, years of warmth, of laughter, of children who carried pieces of all three of them in their smiles. He had once believed himself poor, but now he knew riches greater than gold or land. He was wealthy in ways the world could not measure, in trust, in passion, in the healing grace of being fully chosen, twice over, forever. And so the tale would always end the same way, whether told by Cassidy or by Nia with her quiet wisdom, or by Kira with her fierce laughter. That sometimes the greatest storms bring the gentlest healing, that sometimes love writes its own rules, and that the heart, if it is brave enough, can be vast enough to hold more than it ever imagined. Their children would smile, their tribe would remember, and Cassidy would rest in the certainty that he had found not only love, but home. If this story touched your heart, if the storm and the firelight and the healing warmth of love spoke to you, then let your voice join ours. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, let this tale live on in your words. And do not forget to like and subscribe, so that more stories of love, destiny and healing can find their way to you. Your presence, your support, is the fire that keeps these stories alive, carrying warmth into the hearts that need it most.